Get in a little blue circle. Coming. Okay. Go ahead.
We're good to go?
Yeah, it's coming out.
All right, everybody, I'll call this special meeting of the Village Council to order. We'll begin with the pledge to the flag. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Scott?
Here.
Pedro?
Here.
Sorry, I'm still waiting for my list here. You want to call your name? Tom?
Sinkowitz.
Sinkowitz is
Thank
here.
you. Okay.
McGee here.
Okay.
Nagy here.
Hasnecki here.
Okay.
Gumbo here.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
All right. We have everybody. And just 1 second before we go to the call to the public, and I'll talk a little bit about, how we'll do here. I just want to remind everybody kind of up front, this has been a contentious issue. People are passionate about it. We're all here on a Wednesday night because we care about the lake, we care about the fish, we want to be here. So everybody in this room is trying to do the best for the lake. And I just kind of want to give that out as a reminder, because I know people have gotten a little fired up on this issue on occasion. So with that, we'll go to the call to the public on this issue. We'll come back over to council. I'll actually start by asking Jeff Bronschneider, who's our DNR fisheries expert, who conducted our 2012 fish survey, to give us a little summary of what's there. Then we'll get into discussion of the issues. So with that, let me go to the call to the public, then Jeff. So call to the public, and because we are on the online, you got to come up to the mic. Oh, I was going to do call to the public first, but you know what? I think you're right. I think this is a smart way to do it. Jeff, why don't you give us a summary of what you found in the lake?
Okay. Well, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Jeff Bronscheitel. I'm one of the fisheries biologists here in Southeast Michigan. We work to survey and manage the lakes and streams in this part of the state. I handle the watersheds that includes Wolverine Lake. So I was in charge of the survey that we conducted summer of 2012. And what we did is we came out, if you live on the lake or you were around at that time, you saw buoys maybe out on the lake. We set different kinds of nets out that sample different parts of the lake, catch different kinds of fish. We return most of the fish to the lake alive. We try not to kill any more than we have to. And then after we work up all the data and the samples we've taken from the fish, we evaluate the fish community in the lake to see if it's in balance, which ones are doing well, which ones might need some help, and in general, the overall biological condition of the lake. And I guess I could summarize it real quick by saying that the lake's fish population is actually in very good condition. We have a big survey report. You can read all the details. I'm just going to give a quick little summary here. The fish that everybody fishes for the most, it seems, are the panfish, like bluegills and sunfish. There's lots of those in the lake. The only problem with the bluegills is there are not very many large ones. And initially we were a little mystified by that, because when we checked, the growth rates were very good on the bluegills. And there should be a lot of more larger fish in there. And so I'll come back to that at the end of this. The pumpkin seed sunfish, a lot of nice large ones out there. Not as many as some other lakes, but they're pretty good size. They're not as common as bluegills are. The yellow perch out there, and I'm going to have to refer to my report because I don't remember all the details on this, but yellow perch were pretty abundant, but they were very small. I wouldn't really call it a fishable population. Almost every fish we caught was under 6 inches long. So they provide forage and food for larger fish, but the Wolverine Lake just doesn't have the conditions that tend to develop a good perch fishery. You need a large, very deep lake to have much of a perch fishery develop. But they are out there. Black crappie looks very similar to a bluegill, other than it's speckled black and silver and green. There was quite a few of those out there as well, growing above the state average. They averaged almost 10 inches in length, the ones we caught. Most anglers like to have them 8 inches or larger, so that there's pretty good crappie fishery out there. The one thing we noticed that could help the crappie fishery, if you tend to like fishing for those, would be to have some more woody material in the lake, things like trees and logs, because they tend to congregate around log structures, and that's where they like to reproduce, is around the branches or trees that have fallen in the water. And as with any lake that has a lot of houses, people tend to clear those things out from in front of their property.
In fact, there was a big stump removal project about 20 years ago.
Okay, well, they love stumps, too. So, it's something to consider. People might think about leaving a tree in on one, if it's on, out of the way, on the edge of their property, or even potentially putting something in. Let's see.
My comment on that, Joe, we do have a fish structure program that's been permitted that we're going to put into, so.
The fish structures, if it's primarily woody type material, will definitely benefit the crappies.
Good.
Okay. Largemouth bass. Now we caught 82 largemouth bass, which doesn't sound like a lot. But largemouth bass tend to be very difficult to catch because they avoid the nets. We try electroshocking at night. We did that one night, and we caught a bunch of bass. They're growing very well, and good sizes, good size distribution. I don't remember what it says here about, a quarter of the fish we caught were over the legal size limit, so over 14 inches. So, and since you probably noticed, there's a lot of people that come out to Wolverine Lake to fish for bass. That's because there's a good bass population out there. And they're doing well. They're not being hurt by all that fishing pressure. Northern pike were also more abundant in this lake than most lakes we survey. And that's probably a result partly of the stocking program that occurred, where they were stocked for a couple of years, I think. And they seem to be reproducing very well also. We caught a couple fish up to 35 and 37 inches, and quite a few legal fish over 24 inches. And from the samples that we took, we can tell that we have year classes out there from years when they were not stocked. So they're reproducing themselves, and they don't need to be stocked anymore. Walleye is the fish that's been stocked the most in Wolverine Lake. They're not a native fish to the lake. They don't reproduce in Wolverine Lake. They take very specific conditions before they'll reproduce. And we have only one inland lake in southeast Michigan where they're self-reproducing at this point. But there's a good population out there because they've been stocked at a slightly larger size in the 5 to 7 inch range when they were stocked, and they survived very well. And there's a good population of walleyes out there. Almost everyone we caught was over the legal size limit of 15 inches. And as I'll mention at the end, that's one fish that we would recommend you could continue to stock, but you wouldn't. You know, if you want to have a walleye fishery, you have to keep stocking it because, like I said, they don't reproduce. But if you didn't want a walleye fishery, it wouldn't hurt the lake at all to stop stocking it. That's totally something you'll have to decide what you want out there.
Jeff, question on the walleye. During the winter months, and I've seen a couple of them, some of the fishermen that fish in the winter pretty heavily said they've caught some walleye that were 4 to 5 inches, 5 to 6 inches long. And I just wondered, in everything that you caught, did you catch anything that were a walleye that were in the 6 inch range? Because I'm just
Well,
curious.
our gear wouldn't catch the very small
Right.
ones.
And, you know, and they
So-
were, you know, little hooks and wax worms, and they were picking up a couple. And I don't think we've ever fit, in the last 8 to 10 years, have ever stocked any walleye smaller than 6 inches.
Okay, well,
And I'm just curious if there is some reproduction somehow.
well, there's always a chance that you get a very small number of fish that will survive. The walleye will try to spawn. I mean, they'll come up in the shallows if they can find a rocky area. They'll try to lay their eggs, and you occasionally get a very few that do hatch and survive,
Okay.
but nowhere near enough to support any kind of fishing or long-term survival of that population. So it's not that unusual. The other thing is when fish are stocked, they're stocked at an average size of, say, 6 inches. They could range from 4 inches up to 8 inches actual length if you looked at each individual fish.
I see.
But, so if it was a year following the stocking, there could have been a few very small fish mixed in.
Thank you.
But
Can I ask a question on that, Jeff? Just a little bit of a question. You talked a little earlier about aging the fish to determine whether or not they are growing and reproducing. That's a normal part of your biology measurement, I guess?
Right. We take scale samples or spine samples, and those structures have rings on them, just like a tree. And if you know what you're looking at, you can tell the age of the fish, and then by matching it up with the lengths, you can see if they're growing approximately at the state average rate, and you can determine what year they were born, and look at that year and say, were fish stocked that year, or were they naturally reproduced for somehow in that year? And almost all the walleyes that we aged were from years that they had been stocked.
Interesting.
So,
And that would be true of pike and all of the rest of them?
what's that?
That would be true of pike and other fish I mean, you do that with all fish breed?
We do that with all the game fish, right?
All the game fish?
Yep.
Okay.
And that's where we determine whether they're growing at the good rate or not.
I got you.
And so I guess in summary, there's a very large population of predator fish in the lake. Walleye, pike, and bass primarily. Crappies are predators too. There's approximately 30%, if I remember the figures right from the report, predator biomass in the lake. And that's actually a rather high percentage. Usually it's more down around 20%. When you have a good predator population like this, you tend to see better panfish populations because they eat more of them. With fewer fish left, they grow faster. So you get bigger panfish. But that's not happening with the bluegills. And we suspect something that's been happening in a lot of lakes in the area, and we did notice it out in Wolverine Lake, and that's the extremely rapid growth of an exotic plant out there, the starry stonewort. It grows in very dense mats, up to 2, 3, 4 foot thick, and it covers up the spawning areas. And it also forces out the other native plants. So while it looks great for boating, because there's no plants coming up to the surface, without those native plants there, you don't have the insects and other little invertebrates growing on those plants that the bluegills feed on. So you have less food for the small bluegills. The big bluegills were growing fine. It was all the small ones that weren't growing very well. The bluegill gets bigger, it can eat bigger things. It doesn't need the same food a little bluegill does. But we've seen it in other lakes, and that's what I suspect is one of the issues here is the heavy growth of starry stonewort, just depleting your native plants to the point that it's affecting the fish populations. As far as stocking in the lake, all the fish that we looked at were reproducing just fine. They had a lot of different year classes, which is what we look for, so they're reproducing successfully on a regular basis. The only ones, of course, would be the walleye that are not reproducing. In terms of the lake's balance, the walleye stocking is going to be more of a personal preference, and what the lake residents or the board decides they want to have out there. It provides a more diverse fishery for anglers. It's a very popular game fish, and having them in the lake is not going to affect the rest of the fish population there. They sort of use a different niche in the lake, so to speak. They live out more in the open water area at night, and they hide down in the weeds during the day, which is why it's harder to catch them during the day. But they utilize a little bit different portion of the lake than the other predators do. So having walleye stocked on a regular basis will not hurt the lake any, and it will provide a more diverse fishery. The bass and pike are doing just fine. You don't need to stock any of those anymore. And all of the other fish are reproducing just fine, and you really don't need to stock those either. The predators need a lot of food. In the past, I have made some recommendations that you could consider stocking some forage fish, meaning small minnow fish, that would provide food basically for all the predators in the lake. And it would take a lot of forage to make a big difference, but it is something that can help, especially fish like a golden shiner, which can grow up to about 8 inches long, and pike and walleye and bass just love those large minnows like that. Most of the other native minnows around will not grow that large.
Question
so-
on the,
Yeah, actually, let me go with the question, Ed, and then I'll go to Kristen. So we did do a couple big stockings of minnows and shiners, and I noticed in, the survey of what you had back, it looked like hardly any of those were caught when, in the nets and everything. Is that just because they're not the sort of thing that you're looking to catch, or is it?
Well, no, we did use gear that would catch small minnows.
and that was in 2007 and 2011.
The stockings, I have them for, 2007 and 11. And I don't recall, we didn't see any golden shiners?
It was like one golden
You don't-
shiner and like four of the other ones. Let me take a look here.
Okay,
Yeah.
the small fish don't move around very much.
Yeah, one golden
So
shiner.
when we do find them, if we find any of them, we know there's probably a fair number in the lake. So the fact that we did see a golden shiner, they have become established out there.
Okay.
From our estimate. So if we put a bunch of small nets out all around the lake for a week, we might come up with a couple dozen.
My question is on the two types of bait fish that you had recommended, will they multiply?
Definitely.
Okay.
They're a native fish, native Michigan fish. They just are not present in every water body. And they do reproduce just fine. The one reason I recommended those two kinds is they're the ones that are easily available to purchase. If you try to find other kinds of minnows or forage fish, they just aren't out there. Fathead minnows and golden shiners tend to be about it in terms of native fish that you can find to stock in the lake.
And as far as the shiners, roughly 6 inches, about their maximum length?
The golden shiners will get up to 8 inches if they live long enough. With the number of walleye and pike and bass out there, I wouldn't expect to see very many getting that large.
Yeah.
And they're one of the fish you
That's
can,
the best bait to use.
if you buy bait fish for winter, tip-up fishing, golden shiners is one of the ones that you can buy. And
Thank you.
now, there's the issue that's come up about whether to stock catfish or not. And I want to first explain that a little bit. Catfish are not a trash-eating fish. They're a predator, just like a bass or a pike or a walleye. They tend to live near the bottom of the lake, and they are a little opportunistic. They will eat something that's freshly dead. People fish for them with liver. It's very smelly and bloody, and to them, it's something that's freshly dead. They will eat stink baits. I mean, you hear about that all through the South. People fish for them with these concoctions they come up with, and because they're very smelly. And that's what they are looking for, something that smells. That's how they feed. But in the end, they are a predator, and they will tend to feed on the small bluegills, sunfish, small bass, anything else they can get in their mouth. I mentioned previously there is quite an abundance of predators in the lake already, which is why I would not recommend stocking a lot of catfish. They can provide a more diverse fishery for anglers that like to target them. But you don't want to put a lot of them in the lake because you can overbalance the community structure out there and have too many predators.
So just to be clear, so the walleye don't necessarily compete with the pike and the bass, but the channel cats might.
Channel cats might, plus as they get larger, they will eat bass and small walleyes.
Well, there's real competition.
Jeff, is there, in some of the stuff that I have found, that being a bottom feeder, that catfish and being opportunist, that if there is a fresh egg spawn of, let's say, bass in the shallows, that they will come up and consume them.
The catfish, they will eat eggs occasionally. They don't look for them. There's another fish in the lake I didn't mention. Those are bullheads, which basically look like a catfish, but they rarely get over 12 inches long. And there's a big population of those out there.
Yes.
They're also good to eat, by the way. The people that figure out how to handle them. But the catfish are not going to affect the nesting or spawning any more than the bullheads already are that are out there. They're looking more for live fish. Now, they might go to those spawning areas because there's a lot of fish congregated there and pick off some of the bluegills that are nesting, say. With the bass, do the same thing.
Jeff, what you're saying about the catfish is, you said not to put too many in, but is this, like you would recommend like a one-time stocking to try to help balance the ecosystem out there, that we wouldn't want to do it a lot if you said it was like 300? Just to do it one time and then maybe next time you do your next survey to see how the balance is in the lake, whether we need to do it some more? That's one question. The other question is, are other lakes around here, and have you recommended stocking these channel cats in any other lakes, or, and that do fishermen really go after them in other lakes in southeast Michigan?
Okay.
That's a lot of
Yeah,
questions. I'm sorry.
the first
Sorry.
one.
Yeah, and I should say, before we go too far into questions, because I'm really get a chance to ask questions, but I do want to do a call to the public,
That's
so.
Okay, but very quickly, since catfish are an issue here, I definitely would not recommend doing a large stocking or doing them very frequently. One-time stocking of maybe up to 300 fish will last you for 5 years or more. It'll take 2 or 3 years for them to get up to legal size, and then they just keep growing. And they can live up to 20 years. So, you put 200 or 300 in, it's something a little different. Somebody has a chance to catch out there a big fish, create some excitement. But I would do it once, and then, like you said, wait until we get in the lake again to survey it, or people start showing up, and you see what people think about them. Because you can overdo it, as with any predator, and because they live so long, you don't want to put a lot in. They might reproduce a little bit. It's not really the kind of water that they like for reproducing in, so they might try to spawn and get a few that way. But again, if we keep it to low numbers and more of a one-time type thing and see what happens and see how people like them, and if nobody likes them, there's only a few of them out there, and give them 10 years, they'll be gone.
Why would you say that? If they live to be 20 years old.
Well, there's
and-
going to be
and there's gonna be
some
reproduction,
angling
Once you put them
work.
in the lake, they'll never go away.
Yeah. Well, I'm saying that they'll live 20 years if they're undisturbed. But people will catch them. They're going to catch them just like they do any other fish. They might not be fishing for them, but if they're fishing for bass or pike, they're going to catch a catfish now and then. And so the numbers that would be left after 10 years would be so few out of that initial stocking that they would not have any impact at all. So it's purely a case if you want something a little different, you can put some out there. We don't need them from a predator-prey balance perspective in the lake.
Okay.
Jeffrey,
So,
oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, let's go to a call to the public here, and then we can come back and we can talk a little bit more about catfish in detail, walleye in detail, a couple of the other things. But I really do, since we started out to get a call to the public, I do want to give people a chance to talk. Jeff, thanks for that. I think that was a really good survey, or a really good summary of the survey, what we've got. And with that, let's continue the call to the public. So, and come on up to the mic, because we're online.
Chuck Cardinal, Laguna Drive. How can you tell a dogfish from a catfish? I know they don't bark and meow, but I didn't know there was two animals like that.
They're different species. They look fairly different.
You want me to?
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
You want me to do it from the microphone?
Might as well.
All right. Okay, the names indicate they might be somewhat similar fish, but they're really totally different. A catfish are fish with the whiskers and the wide mouth and whiskers that they use to find their food. A dogfish has a very round head, big sharp teeth, and they almost look like a snake in the water. So basically, though, they don't have any of the whiskers that the catfish do. Catfish, think of a bullhead 3 times the size they normally get, and you have a catfish. A dogfish is, nothing else looks like a dogfish. Very big scales and lots of teeth.
I will add that the first time I saw a dogfish, it freaked me out.
Is it a predator in that sense?
Yeah.
It is, okay. Yeah.
Okay, call to the public? Sure.
Bob Malik, 1620 Thurston. I have a few questions. You mentioned the catfish is a predator, and then you also mentioned bullheads are plentiful. Are they a predator also?
No.
Okay, and now,
They're both.
okay,
They're one of those kinds of fish that eats anything they can get in their mouth.
all right. Will they, bullheads and catfish, will they compete? Or are they two individuals that go their own way? In other words, my question being, if we have the bullheads, are we just adding to that population with a different name?
The catfish will actually eat the bullheads,
Okay,
so that's when they get large enough. They don't have the same food source, so they're not competing for food. The only competition is that one will eat the other if we get the chance.
okay. Now evidently, the bullheads do reproduce in this lake, okay? Where you say the catfish are unlikely to do that,
Correct.
okay? Now, we also, am I correct, do we have carp in this lake too?
Lots of carp.
Okay, well, that's why it wasn't brought up, that's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah.
Now, how does that fare versus the catfish? I mean, does it eat bullheads also?
No. Carp suck up the bottom sediments and filter out the little insects and worms that are in there and spit the dirt back out. The carp are not a native fish to Michigan, or actually to the U.S. even. So they have a totally different food base. And carp are probably more of a detriment to fish spawning beds than catfish would ever be. The carp will go through a spawning area and just suck up all the eggs wherever they find them.
Another question, in Oakland County, how many lakes have you put the catfish in? I mean, is it a numerous amount?
Not a lot of lakes, no. There's a few. Pontiac Lake is one. That comes to mind right off the top of my head.
Yeah, well, the reason I asked her, we had an Oakland County map put out by the county, and it showed the fish in different lakes, and it only represented that fish in 2 lakes, okay? And again, this was a 2011 publication, and I imagine in a couple of years, things have changed, but they didn't seem to update anything different. And my question being, I guess, if they're so popular, why don't we have them throughout Oakland County?
Well, I won't say they're popular everywhere. The other thing that comes up is we tend to stock fish that we can raise. The state of Michigan does not raise catfish. We're able to get a few each year from out of state that we trade other fish for. And most of the catfish stocking is in other parts of the state. We have a few lakes, not in Oakland County, but down in Washtenaw and Wayne that have catfish. Or if a lake is connected to the Great Lakes, it'll have catfish. But we just have not used it a lot in our management because we did not have very many available to us.
Another question would be the predator fish. You talked about putting in the shiners as feeders for these fish. Now, when we drew a lake drawdown every year, it's not substantial, but it does draw in the shorelines and kind of drives everything to the deeper areas. Don't the predators thrive on the small fish that are there, other than adding additional food? I mean, are we taking away their work ethic for them to eat? No, for them to eat smaller fish that are already in the lake, is my point. You're feeding them, like giving a diabetic sugar, I guess.
Well, yeah, predators do tend to really look for the prey, when the lake is drawn down, although it's only drawn down about 3 feet.
Right.
So it doesn't reduce the volume of the lake that much.
No, but it does reduce a lot of shoreline.
it does reduce the shoreline. The forage fish are still spread out. And that's one reason that we tend to recommend stocking the forage fish in the spring if possible, because then they have all summer to be used by all the fish in the lake and potentially reproduce that summer. If you stock them in the fall, they could potentially all get eaten up without a chance to reproduce.
Yeah, well, no, that was my point, though. If these fish, and again, I can't think like a fish, all right? But if they have to work all winter long, and they're feeding on the small fish that are already here, won't they continue that pattern come spring and summer?
Well, I'm not quite sure how to.
Well, all I'm saying is, we talk about, we have these small fish, and we have all these predators. But evidently, these predators aren't eating all these small fish because we keep adding feeders.
Well, they've been feeding on the small fish that are natural to the lake
Mhm.
for years.
Okay,
And the lake has, for a long time, has had a problem with small panfish, small bluegills.
right.
That was before any forage fish were stocked, in any case, in any way. By stocking the forage fish, you can relieve some of the pressure on the other fish, so more of them could survive.
Okay.
So it could help the populations that way.
All right, well, I have one last thing, and I'll get out of your hair. There was a publication that I got an email on from the DNR, and they were talking about grass cats, okay, which was just recently here within probably the last 10 days. And my question is that a feasible type fish to eat up what we have in this lake? Or, I don't know anything about them, so that's why I'm asking.
Grass carp are illegal in the state of Michigan.
Okay?
To have in your possession or stock or anything, because of the potential devastating effect they can have on an ecosystem in a water body, because they eat plants. They eat lots of plants. And they don't necessarily eat the ones you want them to eat. They tend to prefer the native plants, and they leave the invasive plants alone.
So if we could train them for milfoil and starry stonework, we'd be set.
If that was the case, people would be looking at them, but they tend to like the other plants. And because of the concern we have, they've been illegal in Michigan for a long time.
Well, like Jeff-
The grass carp is a separate species than the regular carp that we have, right?
Right, it's totally, it's actually an Asian carp.
Right.
Which, if that,
Jeff,
we don't want it around any more than we want the other Asian carp around.
Jeff, I'd just like to say thank you for the time you spent and the answer to my questions. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, anybody else? Call to the public? Let's go Marco first, then we'll go to
Marco Rodi, 454 Wolverine Drive. You did a great job, thank you. I know we've been talking about this, but just as far as this, maybe like a yes or no question, like, do you think it's a good idea to put catfish in this lake? Just kind of like yes or no.
I guess I can't say yes or no. It's like, if you want to, they won't hurt anything. If you don't want to, it's not going to have any detrimental effect.
Okay.
It's strictly an option to provide more opportunities for the angler to catch something different.
Alrighty, and then last one right here, just like the gentleman that was just up here, he was talking about, and I wrote this down, about the bluegills. They're just so small, and I remember you talking about that. Should, like what he said, should they just, and they're not getting big. I remember these bluegills used to be big, like 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago, but now they're just barely big, but there's billions of them that are quarter size. I see them all the time at the seawall. But do you think it's a good idea to put feeder fish in here, or let, like what that gentleman said before me, like let other fish eat those, or what do you think?
With reference to the catfish? you mean?
No. Just like to put feeder fish in there. So like the bass, the pike, the walleye.
So let me see if I can rephrase your question there, Marco.
Yes.
The question, I think, is putting the feeder fish in reducing the predator population on the bluegill and leading to more stunted fish?
Correct, yes,
Yeah, I
perfect,
think-
thank
yeah.
you, yes.
I think I mentioned that it would take a lot of forage fish to make a significant effect. And I don't think you're anywhere near stocking the number of, I mean, we're talking hundreds of pounds. that you would have to put in to have any effect on reducing the predation on the native fish. And yes, there's a lot of little tiny bluegills. You'd like to have those eaten up.
Right.
Predators tend to pick a little bit larger sized fish for the most part. As the predators get larger, they want something bigger. I don't think it's an issue of not having enough predation on the small native fish. I just looked at, like I said, you could help the predators out a little bit by adding more forage. I don't think it's gonna have a big effect.
Even the stunting their growth.
It's not gonna cause more of the small bluegills to survive, say.
Okay.
The percentage that survive will be about the same. The big issue is trying to get the bluegills, when they're small, to grow faster.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. We go to Linda.
Linda Champagne, 250 Oak Island. I'm not sure if I've heard an answer here on regards to, I'm not a fisherman, I'm a floater. And I float on my raft, and I live over off under the bridge over on the bay. And it's very shallow, and increasingly, you can't put your hands and your toes in the water off your raft because everything's biting me. And it's like, and I don't know how
And if you
we,
look at those, most of those are little bluegills.
exactly, they're these little tiny little
They're
things.
hungry.
So,
By saying that, and they're looking at, I mean, although you can't see them, they can see those little tiny hairs that are sticking up off of your arms and legs. And that's what they're biting. Think maybe that's a little insect.
oh, I get
And
it.
it's an indication that they don't have enough food, for the small fish. That's getting at the problem with the
So I
starry
guess,
stonewort.
I guess that comes back to what we're all sitting here thinking, that we were hoping for an ultimate cure for getting rid of a lot of this little crappy fish, and I shouldn't use that word because that actually is a fish, right? I would use another word, but I'm being retarded. And so that's, I think, what people were hoping, that maybe stocking with some cats, which you've actually told us are not gonna really reproduce, they're actually gonna die out eventually. And is your feeling that they are part of the predator population that could eat some of those little fish until they got so big that they wouldn't want them?
I think you have to look at this more on a big picture basis, is that you're not gonna correct this by stocking fish. You have to look at the whole system and say, what is causing it? And it's not because you don't have enough predator fish in there to eat the little bluegills, you do. But the little bluegills are able to hide in this starry stonewort as well, because they can dive down a few inches into it and they can't be eaten. The thing is to look at how could you address the big factor that's causing this. And I mean, I'd love to see, say, take all of the stocking money for a few years and put it into really jumping on knocking the starry stonewort back.
Yeah, we're gonna-
Usually that treatment is only done in shallow water where it's a problem. But the starry stonewort can grow up to 10, 12, 14 foot deep. And it comes right back into the shallows as soon as you stop treating it. So it would take a big effort to try to kill the starry stonewort back far enough that the native plants can come back. The little bluegills would have enough food then, and they'd stop attacking things that really aren't food.
And let's come back to the starry stonewort issue when we come back here to council, because I think there's some discussion there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Scott Lewis, 145 have to touch base on the starry issue, actually, only in that stunted bluegill have been around well before starry stonewort. So what else would cause what we're seeing recently? Because it's not a new issue. I mean, from surveys back to 47 and forward, it's been a problem. So it's not the only issue. I guess what else could have been?
The large predator population currently in the lake has not always been there. We've surveyed it in the past. And the stocking program over the last 10 years has really raised the number of walleyes and pike, and things have greatly increased. So I think we have a larger predator base in the lake now. And you didn't have that in the past. So you were having a lot of the fish survive, and the bluegills were competing with each other, and they were stunted for that reason. Now they simply don't have enough food to get beyond that small size. The predators are there if they could get at them. But again, the small fish can hide in the vegetation that's getting so thick out there.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, anybody else in call to the public?
Carol Schul, 545 Laguna Court. From everything I've heard tonight, and it's been very interesting, the only reason for getting these horrible, ugly fish that all the children are afraid of are for fishermen. There's no other reason. We have enough predators. It's not going to solve the stunted fish. It's not going to do anything except do something for the fishermen, and I'm dead set against it. Thank you.
All right, let's see if we've got anybody else for the first time.
Gene Matkowski, 670 Wolverine Drive. I think Jeff brought up the last statement that he made. We're putting our money in the wrong place. We should be putting our money not into fish. We have plenty of predators. We should be putting it into controlling the stone. And I urge the council to sit down with their lake consultant and find out what's the best remedy of controlling the stone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom, 2661 Tampa. I lived on the lake for 20-some years or better. I fished this lake a lot. And Jeff, with regards to fish not spawning and reproducing, in the springtime, my boys and I, we hunt carp with bows. We're down here on Glengarry, right where the dam's at on both sides. We see 40 or 50 walleyes up on the rocks trying to spawn, which they do. So out of the plants that you guys put in, there's got to be some of them that are not sterile. So they're trying to reproduce in this lake, okay? That I can tell you, because for the last couple of years, you could go with a flashlight, you know a walleye, their eyes glow like light bulbs. So they're trying to reproduce. We've got a lot of predators in this lake, we really do. One thing that's really strange, and I don't know if I'm wrong in the statement, but we put in sonar to knock the weeds down. So the small bluegills have got nowhere to hide, but it took quite a while for the stony wart to come back and start overpopulating. And all the pike we catch are big pike. I mean, we're talking pike this big. I've got a walleye on my wall that we took out of here, 9 pounds. I'll bring it to the next meeting if you don't believe me. I would rather put walleye in this lake than put in the catfish. The other issue is, I know guys that fish a lot, you catch a catfish, a big one, they cut the line. Because the problem is, not a problem, but how do you clean them? You gotta nail them to a board to skin them. Most guys don't wanna work that hard to get that fish, okay? So, I mean, maybe we could spend our money in a different area, like trying to knock down the stony wart. You know, that would be a great idea. Or put the catfish, I don't know, I disagree putting it in. I'd rather put another load of walleye in, okay?
And just a point of clarification, I don't think we've ever attempted to stock sterile walleye. We're hoping for as much reproduction as possible for them. They just don't.
That was stated
Right,
that
yeah.
they're all, most of them are sterile.
No.
You know what?
No, just, and Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong. The walleye aren't sterile. They try to reproduce. It's just they prefer deeper, sandier areas for the most part, or rockier areas
The
to
eggs and
spawn.
the fry to survive need a little bit different habitat than what is out there. The fish will lay their eggs. It's whether the eggs hatch and whether the fry survive. just the right kind of habitat is not there for that.
Okay.
So a few of them might, we might see some, but.
But not in big numbers. Okay, let me go through and see if I have anybody else for the first time. And, yep.
Dave Dumont, 973 Alberton. How much do 300 catfish cost?
I haven't looked at the price.
Okay.
It depends on the size.
Okay.
I mean, just off the top of my head, for a 6-inch catfish, you might pay $1.50, something like that.
How far would that take us in weed control? Do you think that it'd be more valuable to spend that money on weed control?
Well, I'm not sure. I don't know how much money has been available for fish stocking, or how much more that would add to the weed control.
Chemicals run about 50,000 a year.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And stocking is about 2,000,
Right.
so 2,500 this year. Because we keep upping it.
Okay, anybody else for the first time? First timer.
Sorry, I'm late, had a previous child engagement. Paul Biediger, 2622 Oakview Drive. I'd like to speak again in favor of the catfish. We keep going back to, this is what we did 20 years ago. If you keep doing something over and over and over, it obviously has stopped working. Maybe it's time to go to plan B, because plan A hasn't worked in quite a while on this lake. So if we spend a little bit of money to try to get a big result and it doesn't work, it's better than just dumping plan A back in. Plan A, plan A. We need to try something different. That's why the water board went through all this trouble and all this research to do this. We're trying to make the lake better. We're not trying to irritate anybody because, oh, I caught a catfish, I'm gonna cut the line. Cut the line. Fish digest hooks. Nobody here uses stainless steel hooks. Fish digest hooks in about a week. Seen it before. I've been fishing all of my life. I fish this lake all the time. So I would like to speak in favor of stocking the catfish or something to get rid of the multitude of stunted panfish that we have in this lake, because it's hurting our ecology of our lake. And I would listen to the biologists that do this for a living and the universities that did all the research, and not go so much on personal feelings of certain people. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else for the first time? Bob's dying to come back up. That's what happens when you're not on council anymore, Bob. You gotta wait your turn.
Answered a gentleman, and I hate to pick, but he missed everything that was brought out earlier about what this village has accomplished over the last 20 years. And our DNR representative has spelled all that out in a lot of favoritive ways. But my next question would be, has the DNR considered another fish kill like they did 8, 10, 12 years ago? to go ahead and get rid of the small fish that we had done in this lake, when was it?
About 20 years ago.
18, 20 years.
18, okay, I know it was a while back.
1984.
And that was my question.
Yes, that's really not a tool that we like to use anymore. We prefer to go with a natural control, if at all possible. And like I said, right now we see as the big factor out there would not be affected by killing the fish back, because the bluegill are gonna spawn, and in a couple of years you'll have thousands of little bluegills right back again, if you don't address why there's so many of them.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? One more.
Okay, one more real quick. Marco, 454 Fullview Drive. Just wanted to mention this. I have my wife and I have 2 kids. Yeah, there might be kids that don't like to fish. However, there are quadrillions of them that fish together and bring the kids closer to their families, their dads, and that's all I wanted to say. I recommend, stocking the lake, whatever we agree on, all here together as a family, but I just strongly recommend that. Thanks.
All right. Seeing no others, I'm gonna close the call to the public. We'll come back to more council questions, because I didn't want to go into full questions while Jeff was presenting, but I did want to get some of that information out there before we did the call to the public. So I think that worked out well in the order it went. And actually, I just had kind of a couple points of information for Jeff, just in terms of what we're talking about here. We've got about $2,000 a year for fish stocking that we could use. In terms of lake control, we do a lot of work on the lake in terms of the Starry Stoneward and all the ones. Water Management Board does a ton of work around it. We've moved to a new lake consultant in the last year. He's done some things. We had some harvester problems this year. But it certainly is on our radar that more needs to be done about the Starry Stoneward, that it's a problem. And I think that's...
And we did focus on that this year with our new lake consultant. I mean, it's one of the reasons we, let go our old one. And the attention this year on the Starry was specifically on the Starry Stoneward, to be kind of aggressive on that, to kick it back. And you're right, it was more focused on the shallow areas. So maybe we can talk to our consultant and say, don't just target, whatever, shallow to 8 foot or something. Go,
Yeah, I think
at
that's,
least
I
give
think
us a
that's-
recommendation of how much the difference in cost would be. I mean, we already spend a considerable amount on the lake for weed management, but it's at least an option we can talk to them about. That okay, so this year we got the shallow stuff more under control, which the boaters like and everybody likes. But maybe next year they can at least say, okay, well, these are the areas we would normally have you treat, but if you wanted to treat the deeper areas with Starry Stoneward, then that would be 5 more acres at a cost of $1,000 more. Do you want to spend that money? And and you have to do these treatments, of course, more than once, because they typically don't necessarily. If they killed it the first time you did it, we wouldn't have Starry Stoneward at all. But
they're rather like the stunted panfish. They come back.
Yeah, unfortunately, it comes back. So, but definitely, I think that your recommendation is, heard by the Water Management Board, which most of us are here, and we definitely, I think we need to talk to our lake consultant
and think about that in terms of the fishery, because we have been concentrating on, and taking care of the shallow areas is a lot to begin with. So, I had actually sort of one question, and then I'll kind of go around to folks. So one of the topics that came up in discussion of channel cat options were sterile catfish. Do you know, are there those out there? Are they?
I've never heard of sterile catfish.
Okay. So if and I know when we went
No, they're not.
When
I'll correct that.
Yeah, when we went to look for them, we could only find regular catfish. But then to follow up on that, and you have now seen these in other lakes in the area too for over some period. If we do a small stocking of catfish, they would likely die out over time because it's not a suitable habitat for them to reproduce on their own. Channel catfish, yes.
It's very good habitat for them to survive and grow. It's not great for reproducing. So if you put catfish in, the ones that don't get eaten right away by the bass, which is why we recommend a little larger ones, you stock 3 or 4 inch catfish, which are very plentiful in the suppliers.
It'll be
It's
lunch.
just like putting sushi out there for the bass. But, so most of the ones that you stock will survive. And that's why we say a very low number, give it to try it out. You put 300 in, they might never show up. They might totally disappear. In terms of that they die, they might get eaten. Sometimes they just don't show up. When we stock catfish, from our viewpoint, we stock thousands at a time because we want to establish a little larger population in the lakes where we've used them. But we learn too, and we've learned we might have overdone it in some of those cases. And so we stopped stocking catfish in large numbers anymore. We only use small numbers on a very infrequent basis. I mean, they are native fish. Channel catfish are native to Michigan. They're just not found normally in a lot of the lakes. So, as I mentioned, they're not going to affect the fish community at all, from what I can see. They're going to affect, a little bit public perception, the chance to catch a catfish if some people like to fish for them. The chance to catch something bigger than a little 3 or 4 pound bass when they can catch 10, 12 pound catfish. And I have to say, if people are not familiar with catfish, they're an ugly, nasty fish to deal with. If you are familiar with catfish, they're the easiest thing in the world to clean and hold on to. You just have to, it takes a little practice and knowledge. And anybody that wants to, I'll show them how to handle a catfish, as long as I get to take it home.
Not easier than a bite.
You don't need the nail on the board approach anymore to clean them. Just flay them, like you would any other fish, and skin them. And I don't know if I want to get into the aquatic vegetation control. I mean, I'm involved with that a lot as well, because I review all the permit applications that come through the environmental quality people. They send them to us and say, do you have any issues? And we comment back. And you might have seen some of my comments in the past regarding Wolverine Lake.
Yeah.
And the idea that you don't have, it's a big, expensive program. But he's already out here, already has all the equipment here. How much more would it be to take a few areas and treat them further out from shore? Could you take this fish stocking money from 2 years and combine them together into 1 year to have enough of an effect? It's something to talk to the consultant about. And I don't necessarily mean deeper. Wolverine Lake has a lot of shallow water, very far out from shore. And they typically only treat out to 300 feet from shore or 5 feet deep, whichever they reach first. So you could go a lot further out and still be less than 5 feet deep in large portions of the lake. And you could target areas that tend to be shallow out in the middle of the lake and try it out there first. And see if, and they would help boaters too. So I guess talk with your, I would talk with your consultant and see what options you have with the resources you have available.
Okay. So let me go around to council. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, a couple things, Jeff. First of all, just for general public knowledge, the use of the word sterile catfish came from the email that I had sent out among council members and somehow exited that and got into the public. The word is and should be defined. There are no sterile catfish. I've talked to the University of Auburn. I've talked to a lot of different fishery schools, including Michigan State. Basically, what I've come to understand is that the way they control the population is combinations of male and female release. More male than female, and that's more pond growth anyways. Jeff, you would know more about that than I do. I think the other thing is to talk about the beauty and the beast. Yeah, the catfish is the beast, I guess, if we want to put it in that emotional term. But channel cats, somebody out in the audience, when I was at one of the local pubberies, said, can we noodle for these fish? And I don't know if you know noodling, but that's... noodling is when you're down south, they stick their hands inside of channels and pull out blues. The blue catfish are the ones that get up to 100 pounds, I guess. The catfish that I've come to learn, the channel catfish, which you said is native, the optimum is about 10 pounds, is what I'm reading here. Is that, and something around 23, 24 inches long. So it's a good fighting fish, and I could be reading.
On an inland lake, about 28 to 30 inches and 10 to 12 pounds is about the biggest fish.
Yeah. And when I went into Pennsylvania, I had a discussion with a guy in Pennsylvania because I found an article, University of Pennsylvania, Marcus Schick, and he said that actually, and I'm just checking this out with you, that a channel cat's reproductive status in an impounded lake is something similar to that of a walleye. In other words, they will die out, and they're trying boxes down in some of their lakes so that the channels can go in and reproduce inside of wooden boxes, I guess. But is that true? I'm just reinforcing what you say, because one of the things that we certainly always have worried about is whether when you put a channel catfish in, they're going to take over the lake. That's been part of the presentation. Taking over is no more possible for a channel cat than it would be for walleye. Is that a fair statement, or am I missing?
Well, channel cats, they will reproduce successfully to a small amount.
Mm-hmm.
If you put enough of them in, that small amount could become significant.
Okay.
Which is why you start small and you stay small with the numbers. That way you don't get enough, a significant amount of reproduction that's going to increase your population to any significant degree. Where we stocked thousands, we found that was too many. They did start naturally reproducing, and so we stopped stocking in some way.
Yeah, and I was gonna ask you on that, because I did go to your site, the DNR site, and I found that between the year 2000 and 2012, you stocked 58 inland lakes. I think you put 135,000 into the Raisin River. Over that period of time, yeah. And I did see what you're talking about here in Oakland County, for example. In Macomb County, you did Stony Creek Lake, and I see in Oakland County, Middle Straits Lake, Pontiac Lake, Quarton Lake, the Rouge River, and et cetera. But it looked like, as you said, there was diminished numbers as time went on. So that's the learning curve you were talking about. I mean, I see 200 being stocked in Middle Straits, and then 400, and that was the end of it. So is that?
No, it's fish that we've been stocking for a long time. I mean, the hatcheries have been raising trout for what, 50 years, 70 years?
Yeah.
And we've learned how to handle those and how to stock those because we've been doing it for a long time. Catfish has not been part of our program for very long because we did not raise them ourselves. We didn't have a source for the numbers that we thought we needed. So it's only been in the past 20 years really that we've used catfish. And in that time we've learned that we can overdo it.
Well, one last question, because I really do, I think it was mentioned, I don't know of anybody who lives on this lake that wants to destroy this lake. Linda and I have 645 linear feet on this lake, and the last thing we want to do, we keep rocks because, yeah, they nibble, because we can float around our point, which is all concrete, and you will see unending beds of spawning beds that are out there. It's tough to keep our dog out of them. Actually, he likes to fish. But one thing that really, and I did talk to you off at the beginning, I had this sent from one of the groups down in Arkansas, who also, I understand, brings fish into Michigan. But we were in a conversation about the black, I'm going to say this wrong, you know I'm going to say this wrong. Is it crabby?
Crappie.
Thank you, crappie. All right. You can see how much I fish. The quote here, it says both a predator and prey because they feed on small fish and produce large numbers of offspring. Bluegill, red deer, sunfish, and flathead minnows should be stocked as forage for that fish. Largemouth bass should be maintained at increased numbers to control the crappie population. And we were just talking, we do have black crappie in here in lieu of a catfish. Would that be one to increase if you're trying to go after bluegills, according to what this guy said? And I don't know what his background is, other than I know he sells fish.
So it would not be one I would recommend stocking.
Okay.
Primarily because we've learned that fish that are natural and native to a lake will reproduce on their own just fine if the conditions are proper. And if they're not, stocking them isn't going to help much. The crappies there's good numbers of them already in the lake. And if they have the proper structure and habitat, their population will increase. And they're limited by food as well. I mean, they need minnows basically as they get larger. They eat small fish. I don't think they eat too many small bluegills, that's the problem. They prefer minnows rather than bluegills.
Well, that gets back to the fish structures that, in fact, the two gentlemen that are here for the Water Management Board have done a lot of research, and I think what have you guys, 6 of them that we've had permitted? Correct. And we're going to GPS dump them and do whatever is necessary, but maybe that'll help increase that population on its own. So, end of my question.
Anybody? Just make a comment about the gentleman about the when you catch a catfish, all you do is cut the line. I grew up my family had a cottage in southwest Michigan, and when we caught dogfish and catfish like that, we just brought them in and My mom and my aunt, she planted them underneath all their bushes and planted. We had a wonderful yard, okay? We didn't throw them back in the lake. We put them to some use, even though we didn't eat them.
That was one point I missed.
Okay, we didn't eat them. I mean, so, I mean, if the catfish are put in there, and if you don't like the catfish, make your wife happy, plant them underneath the tree or bush, and it's gonna help them up, okay? They're good fertilizer, if nothing else, all right?
I hope we can find a more fiscally responsible way to fertilize
Yeah, I can
plants.
understand that, but I mean, it's not.
Use the carp and
Yeah, really, use the carp.
Oh, man, the carp. When the carp wash up, they are a problem.
I have a couple questions, yes. Well, Jeff's put these, the Channel Cats as, not so much a recommendation, but as an option. Something we could do or we could not do. Am I correct in reading what you
that's-
said?
yeah. You do it or not do it, it's up to you.
Yeah, so it's, I take that as, here's some choices, I don't recommend either one, you make your choice. That's how I read that, and what I'm missing is the connection between, the Channel Cast was, as I understood it, was a way to reduce the stunned bluegill and so on and so forth. Now it appears that it's really just another selection for a sport fish to some of the fishermen to target. And so that initial connection, cause and effect kind of thing, it's been shown not to be true. Right? I mean, that's not the studded bluegill is, it's a plant issue with the starry stormwort versus introducing yet another fish into the lake. I guess I'm asking, is all that correct? How I'm reading things here.
The survey we just did really helped us to define a little bit and determine that there was a very large predator base already out there.
You said 50% maybe versus 20 and something.
Well, I forget, there was a percentage of biomass out there. There's enough predators to eat plenty of small panfish. And so the thought more with the catfish now is you don't need them as a predator, additional predator. But they would be, just like I said, help to diversify the fishery and give people a little more options on what to catch out there. But, you know, they're not, I don't see that the numbers we'd be talking about would have any effect really on the panfish from a predator prey basis. So the predators out there will do the job if they're able to get to them.
I agree. I think the Channel Cast appears to be, the introduction would be for another choice for the sportsman to target. But it's been framed up to this point, from what I can see, as a strategy to reduce the bluegill, the small bluegill population. And if that's not the case, and the studded bluegills is more a stormwort or problem, I would go with I would lean towards the feedback I've gotten from people that have reached out to me, that there's something about having the catfish introduced into the lake that they find unfavorable. Unless I can, and the pushback initially would be, well, there's a reason for it. But that reason is just yet another, you know, not to totally dismiss that, but that's not an ample reason for me really to really get on board at this point for it. That's my comment.
Let me go to Cliff and then let me go to Ed.
Yeah, I'd kind of like to make a statement on behalf of the Water Management Board. I mean, we do our research as best as we can, and we have the information that we have available at the time that we make our recommendations. We made this recommendation, I believe, last year based on information from the year previous to that. So I think in light of what Jeff's saying tonight, that I agree with, Ron, that we were thinking we were introducing these to be another predator that would hopefully help out with the stunted bluegills. And it indeed, if you do the research and look at it, they do eat those and whatnot. But Jeff's saying that, basically at the numbers we would introduce them on, they wouldn't really have enough of an effect to make any difference. And I think with the results of last year's survey with the fish, which we didn't get the results till this summer, that maybe there's a little bit of a disconnect now with the new data, which says that the predator fish in this lake are not indeed lacking, and that it's maybe a different issue. So, I mean, we can only base our recommendations on the information we have at the time, and I think that things have maybe changed. It has in my mind, you know, with Jeff's presentation tonight, that, you know, we're not introducing these so much for the predator. That was our intent, was to you know, get rid of the stunted ones so that, you know, we actually have a better fishery. And if that's not going to be the effect, if it is just for, you know, adding another sport fish, then, you know, I wouldn't disagree with Ron's summation about the issue.
Well, I think for sure that's why all of us were looking forward so much to getting the results of that fish survey and you know, getting a survey done, like, because it had been a while, and you know, I know both on council and in my previous role as water board chair, it kind of felt each year as we were increasingly sort of shooting in the dark a bit in terms of what we had out there and what we were trying to do. So it's just Ed.
This fish stocking thing, we went through this last year, and we stayed with walleye last year, and we heard most of the same thing that was brought up by a few people, how great the catfish are. Now, just if you go in a grocery store, go into Hiller's and see how much walleye is a pound, and then cut that in third, and that's what catfish are. People enjoy catching the walleye in the lake. Not only are they, well, I think Scott caught 127 inches, and you had a big one, but they're something that they can not only enjoy catching, but they can also enjoy eating. My whole concern is that I started this fish stocking program, and I am very personal about this. So listen carefully. 1988. And Bob Malik and I would go around, and I'd go to multi-lakes, and he'd go over down here to Eagles and get money for donations for the fish stock. And you can ask him, what are you putting in a lake? I said, walleye. Here's $10. Here's $5 in the pot. If I told them catfish, they'd take $10 out. The problem that we're looking at here that's been overlooked is that, according to our expert, and then the very nice 2-page letter he gave us that explained everything that we've talked about, our lake is very successful in the predator level. The small fish, and I was at one of the water board meetings where a gentleman was there who brought it up, is this evil starry stonewort. It's no fun for boating, it's no fun for swimming, and it's no fun for fishing. So there's our enemy. But what I'm getting at is, if we have this great predator base already, why add a small amount of a foreign fish that can grow to be as big or bigger than most of the walleyes, compete with the walleye, compete with the bass, and compete with the pike for food? And they're voracious. People, when they catch them, not everybody takes them home. A lot of them drop the hook off. A lot of them, I see them, they'll bang the head of the fish on the side of the boat to kill it and hope it dies off like they do with the carp. But the point I'm trying to make is that once it's in this lake and it lives longer than most other fish, you're not going to get rid of it. And if they do start to multiply, you could have a real problem on your hand. Why don't we put trout in? Everybody eats trout. They might not reproduce, but just because a couple guys like catfish, we're going to change the whole format of this lake. I think what was laid out here by the DNR, the last year's meeting, I think we had probably about 12 or 14 people that either called, emailed, or wrote a letter for walleye, and 1 or 2 and a few in the audience that didn't. I think we have the same thing here. Most of the people that had wrote and communicated with the village were all for walleye. Very few were for the catfish. But my biggest concern is, and it's not, this should not be, and I hope nobody takes this personal. I'm just looking at what if. It's just like the guy has a beautiful lawn and he says, you know, I like to put a little clover over there. 2 years later, he's got no grass, he's got all clover, because it just goes nuts. And I don't understand, other than somebody wanting to catch one, what is the advantage of having them in our lake? You got dogfish, yuck. You got the catfish, another bottom feeder. You got the carp, who probably do more damage than anything. And then you got the other fish. And I know I enjoy catching walleye. Everybody else that I've talked to enjoys catching them. And you don't hear a whole lot of people bragging about the other fish. And I think we have to look at, as a council, the people that in the last 2 years have came forward and emailed us and talked to us about this, what their feelings are. And like Jeff said, it's a choice that we as a community have to make. And even though 300 is a small number, we could find out in a couple years that 300 was way too many. And I just think that we have a great fishery here. And the biggest problem we have is the shallow shoreline and the invasive weeds that we've gotten, that it's not to, and like I said, those catfish will eat the young bass. They're going to go after everything else too. So we're putting in another predator where we really don't need one. That's it.
Just to follow up on a couple things that have been said. I'm hearing what Jeff is saying relative to the catfish and whether it's just really another sport fish to put in the lake. I was the one who was for the catfish to put in the, maybe I was misinterpreting the way it was presented and the way we looked at it, the water board looked at it and the way we looked at it. And I can appreciate what we have in the lake now, and you're satisfied what we have as far as the sports fish that we have in there. If, in your recommendation about possibly devoting that money for the fish stocking to put it towards trying to control the starry stonewort a little bit better, which I think we need to get with our consultant on. But if we are going to look at this year to put 300 catfish in it, and we're also going to put in fathead minnows and shiners, okay, as feeder fish. I mean, if we did nothing this year and just put in the shiners and the fathead minnows and don't put the catfish in, don't put any more walleyes in, because you said there's a good balance of game fish out there right now, would that be a decent recommendation? And from your perspective, to go in the future, let's see what happens, see how things are next year, and let's look at it again next year. I mean, you're not going to do a survey every year. It was 10 or 12 years since you did the last one. We can appreciate that. It takes a lot of time and effort. So I was out here the first day you were out here with the netting, and I can see what you guys have to go through, okay? But the resources you need. I mean, is that a positive thing to do? I mean, at least put these feeder fish in there and not put the catfish in. Like you said, it was an option. It was not your recommendation, it was an option. But to do that and not put any more walleyes in or bass in or anything at this time, at least this year.
I don't see a big need to stock the forage fish, especially this time of year. You could look at possibly stocking them in the spring, but before then have the chance to talk with your consultant and see whether, instead of buying forage fish, you'd rather put more of an emphasis towards other actions. You're not going to hurt the lake by not stocking forage fish. Then if you decide to stock them, the spring would be better anyway.
Pat, in his report in paragraph 5, he says there that stocking the walleye on a yearly basis is a good thing, but in smaller numbers. Okay. I think it was 3 to 5.
Every other year.
Yeah, every other year, 3 to 5 per acre. And if it makes more sense, if we're not going to put any fish in, if we don't want to put in it, maybe 1,000 walleye this year, and let's go. I think that the $2,000 is not going to make a difference in our budget for weed control, because our weed control budget is pretty stiff, unfortunately.
And most of that would really be in next year's budget anyways.
But it might not be a bad idea on his recommendation if we put the feeder fish in once the lake comes up, maybe like in May or June.
Well, maybe, I would actually.
If we did that.
I would actually say maybe we should look at doing one more stocking of walleye.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
I know we stocked walleye last year, but we went through quite a few years where we stocked the walleye fairly sporadically. In part, we had the, that virus that, we weren't able to get walleye for a few years. We've done some other ones, but we haven't really been on an every other year walleye cycle. So I might be in favor of stocking some walleye this year, have a well-established, make sure we've got a well-established fishery with a couple years of succession in there. Take a look at the options. We'll talk with our lake consultant about next year's program, get some costs around that. We're also going to do, didn't come up during the whole meeting, but we're also going to do the aeration program down in Penny Lake, and I think we hope that that's going to have some beneficial effects in terms of, invasive species and, the forage down there and some other things.
It'll probably help the fish population anyways, the
So,
oxygen.
I think there would still be reason to go ahead with the stocking and to do walleye
I agree.
this year. I have to be honest, actually, after everything I heard tonight, I'm more comfortable with catfish than I would have been before, just in terms of their ability to reproduce. There was a lot of confusion, I think, around whether they were sterile, whether they could reproduce, whether it would be an aggressive species in terms of competing. It's a sports fish. It's another option. I'm not pro or con. I tend to be very conservative, though, around putting a new species in a lake without, a lot of due diligence, a lot of thought. Maybe we could organize up a couple of catfish expeditions on some of the lakes that already have them and get some people some more exposure to them. I don't think I'm ready to go catfish this year, just in general. I think I want us to take another look at it. I want us to take a look at the Starry Stonework. But I'd be good with doing more walleye.
Well, did we not do walleye last year?
Yeah,
we did do
did,
walleye.
yeah.
We did.
And the recommendation from the DNR was to do it every other year.
Yeah, I think we're breaking
Right,
the.
but we hadn't done
Depends on the numbers
Yeah.
that you're talking.
Okay.
Well, what-
Yeah, so
Last
let
year.
me actually read down the numbers that we've done over the last 10 years or so in terms of it. So we had a walleye stocking in '97, a pretty good sized one, and then we didn't do any until 2003, where we did 2,500 6 to 8 inch walleye. So that was a pretty good stocking. In 2004, we did 1,000 7 to 9 inch walleye, and we did pike the year after that. We did 968 6 to 8 inch walleye in 2006. Didn't do any. 2008, we did 535, so a smaller number of 5 to 7 inch walleye. 2009, 765 to 7 inch walleye. And then since then, it's been pike. We did the bass, we did the minnows and the minnows. Last year, we came back and did another 1,200 walleye. And, kind of thinking, one more of those, we would be full up on, on a walleye back to, it's not, we're not actually doing it every other year, but we would be back up to around that sort of level of stocking.
Jeff, can I ask you a question on this? I'm just curious on one point. You talked about the average lake having about 20 or 25% being the normal number of predator fish balance, and here we're in the 60s or 67%.
No, we're 30.
30?
30.
Oh. I thought I heard you say 60 or
I
50.
need 30.
Yeah.
I thought it was 50.
In terms of your average catch, I think it was down on the survey method.
Okay, yeah, the terms of biomass,
Yep,
large predators is 67%.
67%. I thought that was a
So
number.
it's much higher than it.
Catch by weight. Well,
Yeah.
that's how you measure it. It's catch by weight, I guess. I'm not a fisherman.
It's by weight because each predator is so much bigger than it.
Right. Well, so in other words, in a lake, when you were talking a 20% number, is that catch by weight?
20% is more typical, 20 to 30%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to diminish the sports fishermen. I think Ron said the only reason we might think of channel cats is for sports fishermen. That might
I
like
think
that.
that's a legitimate reason.
Well, I don't think it's an illegitimate reason at all either, but I'm wondering if we back away from this number of high predators and the fact that we have a lot of stunted bluegills, and I understand Starry Stonework comes into this, we work on that very aggressively, and that's why we've changed everything on the Water Management Board. Would we not be better off over a longer period of time, which is to take your direction and continue to do more golden shiners and minnows in order to off-balance this high predator percentage we have in the lake? Because what you said, basically, yes, over time, it's not a big enough number to really have an impact, but our predators will have an easier feast, I guess, on the shiners and the minnows, and maybe that will help. Will that help the balance when we have such a high predator? It sounds like we've built a good fisherman's lake here at public expense, and that's fine. It's a question, though, would it make some sense to back off of that continuous addition of predators for a period of time? Whether they're walleye or pike or whatever the fish is, that's not the point.
If you keep the numbers low,
Mhm.
enough to keep the abundance up to satisfy the fishermen,
Mhm.
but not so many that you overbalance on the
That's what I
predator
was,
end.
that's the question I was trying to get out, yeah.
1,200 walleyes was about 5 per acre. I mean, if you, you say you wanted to get started, get a couple of your classes going, I only do half of that, say, this year. And then wait, nothing the next year, and then, stay at that lower number of, say, 600. Say it was more like 3 fish per acre at the stocking level.
Okay, so really, Jeff, you're saying that the 1,205 walleye we did last year are good for last year and this year, and, maybe it's a year to take a year off from stocking.
Well, when you stock consecutive years, the new walleye you put in are just the right size to be foraged for the ones from the year before.
No.
And they do they'll be occupying the same type of area as bigger walleyes, so there'll be more of a chance for them to get eaten. So you do have a more efficient when you go every other year, because the ones stocked 2 years previous aren't gonna eat something that small anymore.
Jeff?
I take it back. I don't think we should do walleye.
Just to answer this little question we're talking about now. First question for you is, I don't see any sense of putting in the feeder fish if the Starry Storm Award is still the biggest problem we have in the lake. But if we were gonna put them in, are we looking at I'm sure they're available because fishermen use them all year long. So what would be an ideal month if we did it? May, June, July?
I would probably look at May.
Okay, so we know that.
That gives them
From
enough time to acclimate to the lake and
Now,
get off a spawn later in the summer.
The only thing that we're not taking into consideration, and what John is bringing up here about predator fish, I would have to say that the majority of the people, unless they get a wall hanger, when they catch a bass in Wolverine Lake, they let it go.
Typical.
And I will tell you this, as being a walleye fisherman and chartered on Lake Erie for many, many years, I catch a walleye, it goes in the frying pan in Wolverine Lake. And I take out about 12 to 20 fish a year. And I know there's a lot of other guys that take them out. And that's why I think that's a number that we're not looking at. We're looking at predators this and predators this, but how many of those fish are consumed by residents and outside?
Right.
Now, when I go here, because I live right now by the access here, when these bass fishermen come in, they got their things in the way and all their bass, and they see them. I see them all go back in the lake. I said, "How's the lake?" He said, "Fine, don't do nothing to it." And then I asked him, "How you do with the walleye?" He said, "Oh, we catch walleye." I said, "Do you keep?" No. He said, "We let everything go because they're in a tournament." But there's a lot of people on the lake. My neighbor, he caught a couple walleyes, and I showed him how to fillet them and had them in the
I know many
pan.
bass anglers that will keep a walleye alive in their boat until they get their limit of bass, then they let the walleye go. But if they don't get their limit, they want to keep that walleye to eat, just like you said.
But most bass fishermen, it's just like you go down to Florida. Everybody used to take a tarp and put it on a hook, take a picture, and it went for catfish food or cat food. Now everything is catch and release, the same like the muskie. But I think the people that live on the lake, that get to fish the lake more than anybody else on a regular basis, will release bass.
Should I
but not
have a
walleye.
comment? Just a comment, not a question.
Let me let Jeff go first, and then I'll go to you, Ron.
That angling mortality or harvest is a significant factor you have to think about. And I don't know, if you gather information that shows a fair number of fish are being harvested, maybe you could do some kind of survey of residents and find, how many walleyes did you keep last year or something, just to get an idea. It might warrant a low-level stocking every year, because there's a significant harvest every year.
Or we have our fish tournament information, but we
Yeah, we do.
release everything there.
It's all released, but at least you know the number
Yeah.
of walleye that you're catching as compared to other fish. So that's why we started it, actually.
That's why I think that, like John had mentioned, if we do 600 walleye this year and plan on potentially putting in the feeder fish in May.
Yeah, but Ed, I think I'm backing off of that for a second, but I'll talk about walleye mortality in a second. Go ahead, Ron.
I just want to make a comment clarifying regarding what John said. My comments earlier were not to diminish the value of sport fishing for channel casts. It was only to draw the distinction, I was trying to draw a distinction from what I had understood the perceived reason for introducing channel casts was to what it really turned out to be. I want to point that out.
Well, I think
Okay,
we've
so-
all agreed that that's part of what the survey resulted, and that's why we wanted Jeff to come in, is to better understand the sequence of events of information that we were getting. And I think, as Ed said and John said, it's been a long time since the survey had been taken, so we were out in the dark for a long period of time, not knowing what our balance of predators were as compared to other lakes and et cetera. So this has helped.
Yeah. So let me go back to walleye for a second. So Ed, I heard something from Jeff that kind of changed my mind on that, and that was just in terms of the efficiency of stocking. Because when we were talking earlier about walleye, the thing that I kind of was swaying me towards walleye is they don't compete directly so much with the pike and the bass, because they occupy a different niche. They do some other things. So you keep a healthy population there. It's got to eat some of the stunted bluegill. I know that people love fishing for the walleye. I know they catch them. I talk to a lot of neighbors about it. It's, I think probably people fish this lake more for bass than for walleye, but people like the walleye. But in terms of getting the best bang for our buck out of a stocking, it sounded like if we stock them 1 year, stock the walleye 1 year, and turn around and stock the next year, we are, in essence, providing some forage fish for the previous year's walleye, right? Then we would be better off.
One possibility,
Yeah, we would be better off if we didn't change anything at all, stocking a number 1 year, skipping a year, saving that money, and stocking twice as many the next year than stocking them year after year in terms of just sheer survival numbers.
Going with like the 1,200 number every other year would be more efficient, I think, in terms
Oh,
of.
that's good to know.
Yeah. No, that,
I thought they'd all gradually go up.
Yep, and that I didn't realize and heard before, so.
Not kindergarten.
I'm kind of feeling like maybe we shouldn't stock this fall. We can take a look, we can talk with our lake management consultant about where we are with the Starry Stonework problem. Potentially look at doing more on that front. Get back in another year, when we look at next year's stocking options. We can do walleye. I'd be interested in further exploring channel cats as an option, but I'm not ready, I'm still not ready to go there. But, so I would recommend just no stocking this year and holding off and waiting.
With the exception of possible feeder fish in May, you said, some of the small
So
fish.
you're going to stock feeder fish, put them in the early summer.
In May.
That's still this fiscal year.
Yeah, that would still be this fiscal
The only
year.
thing, John, so now next year, we're gonna go through this all again, or are we making a recommendation now that, or a motion that we don't stock this year, but next year we will put in 1,200 walleye?
Well, we don't have the actual motion before us one way or the other. I'm looking for consensus here.
I don't think we should make a recommendation, motion to spend money against a budget that's not established.
Well, I don't know about that so much. I mean, we make future planning recommendations all the time, but I think there's been a lot of information that's come back here, that's come back to the water board. I'd like to give them a chance to chew on that, to look at it, to talk with our lake consultant about some of the
I
other
agree.
stuff.
I agree.
You know, we'll deal with next year when we get there, but I think this meeting has been great in terms of at least getting us all back on the same information basis. And that was honestly the reason I wanted to have this meeting, the reason I was so glad we were able to get Jeff here.
Yeah.
Because I thought there, you know,
A lot of misinformation.
there was a lot of misinterpretation and a lot of, you know, I was hearing different facts all the time, and
Yes.
so I think this meeting's been really good for that. I think in terms of a recommendation now, you know, I'd like to hear a recommendation that we not stock fish this fall. We'll hand it back to the water board, see what they come up with. You know, I still look to them for recommendations on this front. I think there's a lot to be said for just going walleye every other year, but I'm willing to take more looks at channel cats and some other stuff too.
Well, if we don't stock this year, then we can actually keep that money and double up next year.
We could keep that money, we could double up. It sounds
Well,
like.
May
it-
would
still be the fiscal
Yeah.
Right, we could still
Well,
be
if
in
we
the-
decided to put something in May, but
Yeah.
I'm saying if we did, just
We didn't do
forego, if we
anything.
forego stocking
That
anything
money
this
rolls
this
over
year.
to the next year, so
Or
we
next
have twice as
spring,
much.
then we could just roll over.
We
double
could
up
do
next
that, but
year.
it sounds like, you know, based on the recommendation for a good walleye level for our lake, that might actually be more money into walleye than we really wanted to make either. So,
Just make a motion that we not stock any fish this fall at all, and possibly stock the feeder fish in May from this this amount that was appropriated or budgeted by the Water Management Board. I don't know if that's right.
So-
I don't know if
so
we would have put
can-
in the spring stocking of shiners and fathead minnows.
No,
In this
Pat,
motion,
Pat,
just.
Pat, would you take a friendly rephrasing of that
That's-
motion?
Of course, no
I-
problem with that at all.
I hear a motion to not stock fish this fall and to ask the water board for a recommendation in the spring.
That sounds much better, John, thank you.
So I have a motion, do I have a second for that, motion? Second there. Okay, further discussion, Ron.
I don't see a need for the motion, actually. I don't see any reason for any action tonight. That's my comment.
It was on the
I-
agenda.
Ship it back to the water.
No.
It is actually, we did call this as a special meeting. But, you know, we called it that in case we needed to actually apportion the money and do the money. We could technically ignore the motion to stock that we got from the water board. They're all here, they've all heard what we've done. I think I'd kind of like, though, to have a motion on the record in terms of what we as a council looked at and decided was the best next course of action. That's why I think we should have a motion.
John, I'm in agreement with you as well, of not stocking anything this year, waiting until the spring, let water board make a recommendation after talking with the lake consultant. I think Jeff has been a wealth of information, and I want to thank you for coming,
Yes,
taking the
yes.
time to come. It's really cleared up a lot of questions that have been out there, and a lot of misconceptions have been out there, so I appreciate the fact that you came. So I'm in agreement with what you're suggesting.
All right. Further discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Jeff.
Motion to.
I would entertain your motion. So, motion to adjourn from
Second.
Sinkowitz, second from Nedrow. Further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. We are
Thank everybody in
adjourned.
the audience for coming as well.
Thank you.
Audience participation, we love.